Good afternoon, and let me welcome you to the February edition of Live with Kellye Ken. My co-host is former Dean Kellye Testy, the President and CEO of LSAC, and I'm Ken Randall, also a former Dean and the founder of iLaw BARBRI Distance Education. We have a very important topic today, which is law careers, focusing on what you can do with a law degree in the 2020s and beyond. At the core of the JD education is critical thinking and creative problem solving. And as a result, lawyers often play impactful leadership roles in their local, national, and global communities, navigating change and complexity on behalf of a wide range of organizations, clients, and causes. And while a JD degree is the pathway to practice law as a licensed lawyer, law schools today also offer advanced and specialized coursework for both lawyers and non-lawyers in residential, online, and blended formats. So today we are thrilled and honored to have 5 experts who will highlight the wide array of opportunities available to graduates of JD and other programs. So it's now my honor to introduce 5 experts, and then I'll turn it over to Kellye. I'm going to start. We have 4 deans and 1 executive director. I'll start with our executive director, Jim Leipold, the executive director of NALP, the National Association of Law Placement. We have Dean Dan Hamilton, the dean of the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, UNLV, William S. Boyd School of Law. We have Dean Mary Lou Bilek, the dean of the City University of New York School of Law, CUNY. We have Dean Melanie Leslie, the dean of the Benjamin N. Cardozo School of Law in New York, part of Yeshiva University. And finally, we have Dean Ben Barros, the dean of the University of Toledo College of Law. Jim and deans, thank you so much for taking the time. January is such a busy time of year at law schools. We're delighted to have you spend an hour with us. I'm now going to turn it over to Kellye, who will do some questioning, although Kellye, we're also interested in your unique insights as President and CEO of LSAC. So Kellye, good to be with you again.
Thank you, Ken. I really appreciate that. And I want to welcome the deans and also Jim as well. Really appreciate you all joining us today. And at the Law School Admission Council, of course, we start everyone on their enrollment journey, but that has a core purpose, which is to obtain a degree in law, whether it be a JD or an LLM or even a master's degree, and then to use that to make a difference in the world. And that's what our candidates are really seeking. So I'm really happy to be with you all today to talk a little bit about the range of opportunity that is available out there for people who pursue education in law. So thank you all again for joining us, and Ken, thank you and iLaw for being with us today.
Thank you.
I want to begin with Jim Leipold, who leads the National Association for Law Placement, which does a great job of keeping track of what's happening in the employment field for JD graduates. And so, Jim, maybe I'll begin with you before I turn to the dean's perspectives, and give us just a little bit of your sense at a high level for what's happening out in the market.
Sure, I'd be happy to, Kellye. There are 4 things I guess I would say just to start us off. The first is that we're in our 6th year of expanding employment opportunities for law school graduates. I think most of you know that we had the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, and that economic interruption had a big impact on legal employment. But for the 6th year now, employment opportunities have been expanding. They look more like they did before the recession than immediately after the recession, so that's good news. The second thing I would say is just to give you a sense of the broad picture, about 75% of law school graduates take a job right out of law school where they're using their law license to practice law in some setting. And about another 13% are doing something that's closely related to law. They may not need a law license, but they have a law-related job of some sort. So most law school graduates are using their law license in their employment. The third thing that's important to know is that law school graduates do all kinds of different things. There's no one common pathway. just over half the class practices what we call private practice law. So they work for a law firm, a private law firm of some sort, and it could be even by themselves as a solo practitioner. About another 30% work in what we would call the public sector. So that includes government, working for the courts, working in public interest, working for the military, and then small percentages do other things in the business sector or in education. The last thing I would say, just to open here, is that within that big private practice sector, people practice in all kinds of law firms. And many of them, about half, are very small, with 50 lawyers or fewer. And then at the other end of the spectrum, about a quarter of the people who practice in the private practice setting practice in very large law firms of more than 500 lawyers. And so the opportunities are really very different even within that private practice setting. I think I'll leave it there, and as we go on, I'd be happy to add some color to some of that.
That's good. Great introduction, Jim. Thank you. And thank you for all the work that you and NALP do to help us understand that national picture. It's very helpful.
Sure.
We have 4 terrific deans with us today, and I know our candidates really enjoy hearing directly from deans about what's happening out in the law schools. So I want to now turn to each of the deans for an opening statement, just a reflection from their perspective on the opportunities that education and law provides for their graduates and what they're seeing in their respective parts of the country, because we have a great range here. We have people from the West, we have the East, we have the Great Lakes. So Ben, let me start with you, and I'll ask each of you to provide an opening comment about what you're seeing for employment prospects out there.
Sure. So employment prospects for our graduates are robust, as Jim was alluding to. They've really rebounded, as they have at most law schools nationally, since the depths of the recession. Actually, there are a lot of different ways, a lot of different numbers we look at when we're talking about graduate employment, but our graduate employment numbers for last year were the highest they've been in recorded history. And we can't find numbers that were higher, even in the 2000s. I think one factor in that, which Jim didn't mention, but he often does, is that the number of law school graduates nationwide is declining, and I think that's probably a factor. But we're finding that our graduates are finding jobs. They're finding the kind of jobs that they want. And there is a real diversity, as Jim alluded to, in what people do right out of law school. There's even more diversity in what they do long term. But continue to see evidence that the JD is a very powerful degree that opens a lot of doors. But I would also say that, students, while they're in law school, have to take a lot of responsibility in shaping their own careers, putting themselves in the best position to succeed. And if they do, while you're in law school, you do a lot of things like externships and develop a great professional profile, and maybe do some other things like graduate degrees, which we might talk about later. You really put yourself in a great position to succeed on the job market.
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate that. Let me turn to Dean Melanie Leslie from Cardozo for your thought on what you're seeing.
Thanks, Kelly.
Yeah.
I agree that job numbers look healthy. In addition to jobs that require someone to pass the bar and have a JD, here in New York, we're seeing a lot of different jobs develop outside of that track. I would say that a lot of it has to do with the big data revolution. It's really changing the way that careers are developing. We have now great need for professionals in cybersecurity and compliance, and being able to create information governance systems that comply with a variety of legal regimes, not just in the United States, but in Europe, which are very different privacy laws. And so those kinds of jobs don't always require someone to have a JD. A lot of times you'll see employers looking for someone and they'll say JD or MBA, but increasingly we're seeing those jobs filled by people with the JD, because the training you get in law school, I would argue, makes you very well suited for a job that's very analytical and requires you to come up with systems that comply with the law. So that's really changing a lot. And at the same time, we're seeing a boom in technology, and it's changing so fast we can't even keep up with it, and that is creating jobs. And the final thing we're seeing is that corporations are increasingly bringing a lot of legal work in-house. And so they are more willing than they used to be to kind of hire lawyers right from law school into a corporate legal department rather than waiting till someone's practiced for several years and then bringing them over to the corporate side. So that's been a really interesting development as well.
Thank you so much. It's great you mentioned law and technology. We're already getting a number of questions about that connection. Also seeing a lot of questions about public service and public interest. And Mary Lou, let me turn to you. Your school there, the City University of New York's long been known as a leader in that field, but any opening comment on that or related subjects?
Sure. As you said, our school is kind of a niche school. I mean, our mission is to train public interest lawyers. So a lot of what I see is what's happening in the public interest sector. Although I will say, as Jim noted, even the folks in private practice in all kinds of settings, and people in private practice are often doing what we consider public interest work, although I note that the national surveys don't. But what they're doing is going out to community-based practices, firms of 3 to 10 lawyers working on sliding scales, speaking the languages of their communities, and doing the work, law in the service of human needs. You know, what does that community need? The more traditional public interest market, particularly in New York City, is really booming. And part of that is the current administration, which has decided that all people who are in danger of losing their apartments should have a lawyer. So that's kind of like what we have in the criminal defense field, where everybody who's charged with a crime gets a lawyer. So this means that over the lifetime of this program, as it expands, in the next 2 or 3 years, we're adding 1,000 public interest lawyers just in New York City, just to meet the housing needs of our lowest income New Yorkers. In addition, there's legislation now pending in the city having to do with immigration law, suggesting that all immigrants are entitled to a lawyer if they're facing deportation. That will lead to another boom. And those are just kind of the tip of the iceberg. I'll leave it at that, kind of on my comment about, you know, what's happening in public interest law, except for to say that what I do know is that there are legal services jobs going unfilled in rural neighborhoods all across the United States. So, you know, often you hear there are too many lawyers. I think the answer to that question is yes, there are too many lawyers looking for a certain kind of job, but there are many people in the country who need lawyers, and there are jobs created for some of those, and there are jobs waiting to be created by kind of the entrepreneurial next generation of new lawyers, putting their creativity and their passion to the test as they try to figure out how to create a justice system that provides lawyers for everyone in need of them.
Thank you, Mary Lou. It's a great reminder that I don't think any of us think we've got too much justice in the world, do we? So that need's certainly there. Dan Hamilton from, we ought to bring in the West here. What about your perspective from Las Vegas?
So thanks, Kelly. I think I am the only dean west of the Mississippi. So I will say that out west, things look good. Tell anybody who wants to talk about law school that it's a great time to go to law school. It is as Jim's data points out, it's not a saturated market anymore. So there's simply opportunity. We have the advantage of being the only law school in the state. So that does help us out here, out in the West. And there's also more data available, I think, than there's ever been, right? Both from Jim and I would say at all applicants on the 509 forms, where they can really drill down deeply into what is going on at each law school and in a very granular way, which would help them make their decisions and learn about where they're thinking about going to law school. I take great delight that we do offer such a flexible and versatile degree. And I'm always interested to hear about law grads who are not in private practice, who are doing such interesting things, right? And who almost tell me uniformly, they still find their law degree indispensable, even if they're not in a capital L law job. And I find that always very interesting about the skill set that you talked about. And I also am interested to hear from Jim's data and from my own experience, just how many of our grads go into small firms and how that might be an eye-opening possibility for them. And to make the claim that small firms are great places to work by and large, which is to say it is a way to provide work-life balance, and it's a way to have great experience earlier. So I'm very proud that at UNLV, I think we're #1 for placement in small firms in our particular, nationally, because we have such a particularized legal market. So I would never rule that out as something law grads should consider. And finally, I think we should mention just how much of the operation is on the non-JD side now, right? And what are our operations, how have our operations changed to provide career counseling and services for our non-JD population? I think I saw in the most recent data, it's now 15% of the population of American law schools are non-JD. And how has that affected our operation? And I'd be the first to say we don't have a great answer, or at least a structured answer to that question yet here, but it's something I think we all have to think about.
It's a great point, Dan, and I'll pick that question up about non-JD programs in just a minute. First, picking up on your point about the skills that legal education brings forward. I saw a great study the other day talking about the top skills that employers are looking for in this decade of the 21st century. And the top 3 were creativity, problem solving, and skills of persuasion and communication. Mm-hmm. And if there's 3 things that legal education, in my view, really aims for, those are good. You know, I think a lot of us see it as a degree in complex and creative problem solving. So it makes sense that you're seeing that. Jim, I want to get the dean's perspectives on some other issues about what's happening there. But before we do that, any trends that you want to really call out that you're seeing in the national data that you think we need to take note of? Trends around gender, racial demographics, just kinds of positions, or anything else that you're seeing that we should take note of?
Sure. I can respond. I mean, I can do that by responding to a number of the themes that each of the deans have raised. You know, I think Dean Leslie is exactly right in pointing out that there are a variety of new opportunities post-recession as the market changes and as the practice of law changes, as we incorporate technology more into the practice of law, as data analytics and data privacy and security become more important parts of all the things we do. I saw one question flash across the screen, you know, is it useful to have a programming background and go to law school? I would say absolutely. I think the intersection of technology and law is sort of the future for this profession, and so I think that's super important. You know, the perspective from CUNY is really important. I think for a long time, lawyers served people, and more recently in our American history in particular, lawyers have tended to serve corporations, but the people still need legal services, and there are many, many markets where that need is unmet. You know, to pick up on that small firm trend, I think most people go to law school imagining if they're going to be in private practice, they'll be in a big firm, but that's just not the case. You know, last year, 34% of the people who went into private practice practiced at a firm of 10 lawyers or fewer. That's the most common practice setting. And it's not the practice setting that's glorified, you know, on television or in the novels we read. And so it's an important part of the market that many law students, I think, don't know enough about. I think the path to partnership and becoming a law firm partner is not a goal of a lot of young people anymore. And so I think it's important to know that. Many people think they'll just spend some time at a law firm and get good training and move on, and that's a perfectly valid career path. And the point of working for a corporation, if that's what you want to do, there are increasing opportunities to go directly. It's what we call working in-house. It's sort of a term of art that means you're practicing law for a corporation. You're their legal analyst or their legal advisor in-house. Those opportunities are growing, and they're growing particularly in the entrepreneurial space, in the Silicon Valley technology startup space, and it is much more common now to be able to start your career in-house than it was earlier. So I would say those are all new features of what I would call the post-recession job market.
Great, thank you so much. And Deans, coming back to you, you know, there's been a mention of by several of you about degrees other than the JD. So I want to pose really a bit of an open-ended question to you, which is both to talk a little bit about the range of things you're seeing that JD grads can do, because there is, as many of you noted, such a wide variety, or to comment a little bit about what you're seeing for people who choose maybe not the JD, but they're getting an LLM at your school, or they're getting one of the newer master's degrees in law that is seeing quite a bit of growth in all of our law schools. So let's talk a little bit about some of those other degrees and also just the range of things that you're seeing your JD graduates pursue. And Dan, let me come to you first, since you were last in the first round.
Well, thanks, Kellye. I made a little list in preparation for this conversation. Here is what came to me in terms of some of our most recent grads. I had breakfast today with someone who's now in the leadership at the federal government agency, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and the ATF. And we also have a vice president at the UFC, the Universal, the fight, martial arts fighting. And we've got an alum working at ICM in LA, and another one working at Churchill Downs in Kentucky. So what I mean is that those are grads who very much rely upon their JD, who have a variety of experience that I literally could not have dreamed up if I had tried, right? Sure. And they're, as Ben pointed out, they're hustling. They're making it happen for themselves in a path that isn't always apparent to them. And so that is in many ways, and they have a lot, I would say by and large, I'm curious what the other deans think, of career satisfaction. In other words, they really feel like they are getting value from their JD, but also doing something off the beaten track that is interesting. On the non-JD side, I would make a pitch that the more specialized your LLM is, the more you can help your grads. That's not to say that general LLMs don't have their place. That's simply to say that the specialized LLM, in our case in gaming and other various other specialized LLMs, really do offer value for money. And that is a different model that I think bears thinking about. What responsibility do we have for our big LLM classes at some schools? And that's where I take some solace that I think a specialized LLM has a clearer path to helping those grads get jobs and pursue careers.
Good, thank you, Dan. And for those of you watching who may be less familiar with the LLM degree, let me note that it's classically been used in two contexts. One is after the JD in the US for graduates who want to specialize in something like tax or IP or what have you. Also by those coming from another country who may have had an undergraduate degree in law and now want the master's of the LLM degree from a US institution. So really those two contexts primarily there, and it can be a little confusing because now we have the master's degrees that are different than the LLMs that are out there. Dean Leslie, let me open this up to you to get your wisdom on this point.
A couple of things. First of all, I agree that the specialized LLM, for an American JD, the specialized LLM is important because, and I think you shouldn't worry. I'm looking at some of the questions here. What do I do after the JD? What degree should I get? I don't think you should worry about getting a degree necessarily after the JD because we believe we're training you to have a great career with the JD. The reasons to get an LLM if you have an American JD are limited. If you pick a very narrow program, there are certain markets where the LLM actually gives you career opportunities. I would say tax is one. If you go on and get a specialized degree in tax. At Cardozo, we have an intellectual property LLM because a lot of lawyers didn't take a lot of intellectual property related courses when they were a JD, and 5 years out suddenly realize, oh, this is the direction things are moving. Data, intellectual property, I'm going to get some specialized training. But I don't think other than that, it's something you have to worry about necessarily when you're thinking about going to law school. The other degree that we're seeing explosive growth in is what's called, well, there's no standardized name for it. It's a master's degree for non-lawyers. This is for people who don't intend to ever practice law. What they do want to do is have a little bit of knowledge about the legal regime that is governing their conduct in the business that they're in. So for instance, you could take a master's degree in data law and privacy at our school and several other schools. If you work in a field that works with a lot of big data and you want to know something about privacy regulations, you think you're going to be more effective at your job if you understand how to not break the law on a regular basis, or you can answer a question without always calling up in-house counsel. I know that some schools have had great success with master's degrees in healthcare compliance, because that is a heavily regulated field, and business professionals in those fields may feel that they would do better if they understood the legal regime. They're not going to go out and have clients and practice law. So I think those are, I would make one more point. I know I'm not supposed to talk too long, but I think based on the question, okay, I think based on the questions, this is an important one. I see a lot of concerns about, well, how soon should I specialize? Should I have concentrations in certain fields? And there's some anxiety about that. And I have strong feelings about this. I would say some people know what they want to do when they walk into law school and they never change their mind, and that's fantastic. But I think the key is versatility. It is absolutely fine to not know what you want to do in 1L year, in 2L year, and believe it or not, in 3L year, and believe it or not, 5 years after you get your JD, you could decide that the track that you pick is really not fulfilling for you and you want to do some other kind of law. And so if there is anxiety about that out there, I just want to reassure people this is an incredibly flexible degree, and having a lot of different skills and exposure to a lot of different kinds of law actually can make you more attractive to employers, not less.
Thank you, Melanie, for mentioning that. You know, it's especially important for, I think, people who are maybe first-generation law students. You know, I remember when I started, I didn't know a transactional lawyer from a litigator, and it's okay not to know at the outset, or maybe even now, right? What we all want to do. Mary Lou, let me get your perspective, please.
Well, I want to follow up on the point you just made. You know, I think it's really important to first of all, not to think of law school as school, and not to think of legal education as just learning knowledge. It's a path to a profession, a life of learning, but also it's the time when you need to figure out how to take on being that professional. What kind of lawyer are you going to be? Not just are you going to be somebody who counsels people or stands up and argues at trial, but how do you want to make the work-life balance that you want? What are the tasks that you like to do? Do you like to shut yourself up in the room and sit in front of the computer and write, very intellectual arguments? Then you want to be an appellate lawyer, right? But do you want to just get up and argue by the seat of your pants in court? Well, then maybe you want to be a career prosecutor or a career criminal defense attorney. Do you want to sit with somebody and hold their hand and try to figure out how they're going to plan for the guardianship for their child if they get deported? Then you want to be that kind of a lawyer. And I think it's as important to focus on what are the ways of being with and without other people that are going to fill your days as a worker, and then work from there. And the way you do that, as Ben said in his, Dean Barros said in his first comment, was you do internships, you do clinics, and you try these things on. And some of you will find that your first job is still part, as Dean Leslie has said, of trying things on. And your second job may still be part of trying things on. And you will eventually get to where each job has added to your skill set and added to your expertise, but you will find your niche. And I would say that's a more standard career path than the career path of somebody who leaves law school and launches full-blown into the world. On the question of master's degrees, I'm going to do a slightly different spin on it, which is to say, some of you should not ignore the expertise that you bring to law school. So while, as people have mentioned, you know, it'd be good if you knew some programming, if you want to get into tech or you want to better understand the delivery of legal services in the future, which is going to rely on tech. But do you have a master's in social work? Do you have a master's in public policy? You know, those are things that you bring to the table. How about a master's in journalism? You know, there's like, if I had it to do over again, I'd be a justice reporter. Like, I just want those words after my name, right? But you bring a lot of life experience. Do you speak a second language? All of those things. You should be talking early to mentors and career planning and informational interviews with people in the profession. I don't want a job from you. Just talk to me about your path. They will help you discover what you bring to the table and what you want to do.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Ben, I want to come back to you, not only from your perspective as the dean there at Toledo, but I know you also serve on the executive committee, a leadership role with the Association of American Law Schools. So what are you seeing from both those vantage points that will help further our conversation on these topics?
Well, you know, one thing that I've seen and that we talk about a lot as deans and in the leadership of the Association of American Law Schools is we think about how the legal profession might be changing. One theme that's very much come up already is technology. I don't think if you're technology phobic, I don't think you should be afraid of going to law school. But if you love technology, I think there are a lot of opportunities in cybersecurity. We were talking about master's degrees. One other type of master's degree to think about is doing a joint degree. I saw a couple questions floating around from the audience about that. There are some classic combinations. The JD MBA is a very powerful combination. We have a very successful one that the people who go through that program are in high demand in the marketplace. We at my university have a new master's in cybersecurity, and I think we're going to create a joint degree with that. I think that would be a really powerful combination. So, but to build on one of the things Mary Lou and others were just saying is you need to create, I guess there are two sometimes conflicting impulses. One is that you need to create a professional profile. I think you want to create an identity that separates your resume from the other 100 in the stack, ideally in some area you're passionate about. But then there's this question about how do you figure out what you're passionate about? And I think you need to be careful of specializing too early or making decisions too early based on what you think you'd be interested in going into. I went to law school to be a prosecutor. I wanted to be a Manhattan DA. I didn't take a single criminal law course after my first year. Philosophy major undergrad, ended up discovering a very odd passion for business law, and that's what I ended up doing. As you go through law school, and actually as you go through your career, your early career, you discover things about yourself, you discover opportunities, and you need to be able to be both open-minded and also self-directed. And the more experiences that you can get, the more thought that you can put into it. Mary Lou mentioned having informational interviews with lawyers. The more you can learn about what's a possibility and learn about yourself, the better off you're going to be long-term.
Thank you so much. Wow. I want to go to your law schools. Lots of good things happening out there. I want to turn this over to Ken now because I see our audience questions are really surging. We've got over 100. And so Ken, why don't you take it from here for a bit? I think we've got about 20 minutes for some questions that are coming in from our viewers, and we can continue the conversation that way.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. I want to thank the 1,600 people who have registered for today's program. We're delighted to have you. As Kelly said, there are more than 100 questions. I'm not sure how I can sort them out, but I will say that someone on Kelly's staff at LSAC will respond to each of the questions if we don't get to yours. So I think I'm going to throw a single question out to each of our panelists. And Jim, I'm going to start with you. We've had several questions from students who are interested in what's going to be the impact of LegalZoom and AI, artificial intelligence, and lawyer platforms as they think about a legal career going forward?
So if you're going to become a lawyer at this moment in history, you have to be the kind of person who's prepared to go into a profession that's changing and without knowing exactly where that change is going to take us. So the way we practice law in this country is changing, and technology is part of that. There's a wonky answer that includes the fact that deregulation is also part of that. For a long time, only lawyers, quote unquote lawyers, have been able to deliver legal services. And throughout the world, countries are starting to deregulate and allow non-lawyers to deliver some legal services in some settings because there aren't enough lawyers to go around, as Mary Lou has highlighted. So I would say that artificial intelligence is going to play a role. I mean, artificial intelligence is based on rules, and law is essentially a rule-based thing. So there are many things that AI is ideally situated to do. And there's tremendous business pressure, both from people and from corporations, to make legal services less expensive, to streamline things, to create the efficiencies that we've created in manufacturing and in other business settings, to bring that to the law, so that solving every legal problem is not a bespoke problem. You start from scratch and a human being solves that problem all over again. But, we will always need human beings, and we will always need the counselors, and we will always need human beings to exercise judgment and assess risk in a way that machine learning and big data can't do as effectively and as ethically as human beings can. So the practice of law is going to change rapidly in the next decade, and technology and big data is going to be a part of that. AI is going to be a part of that. But that will actually create opportunities. It's not going to eliminate lawyer jobs, but it's going to change the way some lawyers practice.
Great. Wonderful insight. Everyone is interested in what you've offered. Dean Bilek, I want to ask you then, you talk about a person picking a pathway, that she or he is passionate about, and that can change. So when you're thinking about law school, do you do any kind of projections about fields of law that are likely to be kind of hot areas of need, or do you say it's too uncertain for me to make those kinds of projections?
I think if you already have a passion, that it's kind of good for you to find a law school that matches that passion, or that offers an array of electives in that area, has some faculty interested in that area, and employs people in that area. If you don't already have a passion, if you're one of those people who from the time they were 5 and argued about whether or not they could have dessert first, everybody told them they should become a lawyer, then I think what you should find a school that feels like a learning environment that you will thrive in. Do you operate well in a high energy, everything swirling around you, high drama, people are arguing in the hall, they're arguing the law, not with each other. But, does that work for you? Does it work better for you to be in a place where everybody's a little more low key and there's a lot of people with their butts in carols studying? Find a place where you'll thrive during the 3 years, and you will find your path, and you will eventually find your passion.
Yeah,
the thing not to do is to go in your room and pull up your covers until you can figure out what your passion is. The way you figure it out is by trying things.
Yeah, great. Dean Leslie, let me, you were nodding and you may have some insights on that as well, but I also want you to bring in the question of geography. So as law students look at the 208, approved ABA law schools, and they're thinking about interfacing where they're going, where their opportunities are with subject matter, how do they then link that with the geography of the law school and the location of the law school?
So Ken, I'm a little confused about your question, because you're saying how important is geography when you're making your decision?
Yeah, if you want to practice in Ohio, do you go to Toledo? If you want to be in New York, you go to Cardozo?
You should always go to Toledo.
Thank you, Melanie.
Anytime, Ben. I think geography can matter. You should really look at where the graduates of a particular school are landing job-wise. There are schools that send graduates all over the United States. There are other schools that are hyper-local. And then there's a mix in between where they may have big pockets of alumni in major cities. But I think geography does matter when you're thinking about building a career. It's not determinative, but if you think you want to practice in a certain place, I'm going to say it probably would benefit you to either go to school in that place or check out their alumni base on LinkedIn and get a sense of, do they have a vibrant alumni community in the place where you think you want to practice. That said, it's also important to have adventure in your life, and law school is one of the biggest adventures you're going to undertake. And if you've always wanted to practice in New York, for instance, or just live in New York or live in California or live in Toledo, you should do it. You should take the step and have a big adventure, because again, the end of the day, law degrees are pretty flexible.
Yeah.
Is that what you were getting at, Ken?
It is. It is. And Ben, I see you nodding to that question, and going back to your comments about when you go to law school, you may have ideas about what you want to do that change, and I guess geography can change. So how do you advise students who have some idea of what they want to do, but realizing that those ideas also can change?
So I think it's really important to pick a direction and keep an open mind. So just back to the geography idea. I do think geography can be important. I think there are some virtues of going to law school near where you want to practice, but there are a lot of other reasons to potentially go somewhere else. Particular program, cost might be an opportunity. You might get a really great opportunity to go and get your JD at a significantly lower cost somewhere else than where you want to practice. And I think if you do that, again, one theme of what I and others have said is that you need to kind of take ownership of your own career. So if you're in Toledo and you decide, okay, I really want to practice in Atlanta, Georgia, or in San Diego or something like that, you need to be thoughtful about, okay, in your summers, maybe you'd probably need to go to Atlanta, get to know people there. We happen to have lots of alums in Atlanta, which is why it comes to mind. As far as being adaptable and changing your mind, I think the worst thing to do, and it's not just, as Mary Lou was saying, staying under the covers. Sometimes the wide range of things that are available to you can be overwhelming. And so I think you want to pick an interest and go in a particular direction, because it gives you some structure in what to do, and it will help you be less overwhelmed with all of the opportunities. But you also at the same time want to be thoughtful and open-minded about what opportunities might present themselves, and also learning from each of your experiences to help direct you in the future.
Great, thank you. Really helpful. Dan, we've had some questions about prospective law students who might want to become a judge one day or go into government. Government might be on people's minds with so much on the television these days. So how about for people who want to be a judge or spend their life in a government role?
Well, first I'd say if you want adventure, you should come to Vegas.
I agree. I was born and raised in Las Vegas. You can't.
Oh, fabulous.
Yeah, we'll have to talk after this.
I think government attorneys have a lot more authority and a lot more they shape public policy in a very fundamental way. So again, I was having breakfast with this alum who worked at the ATF. He has 2,000 people working for him, right? Inside a federal agency. And I thought, man, that is a place where you can really have an impact that's below the radar and you don't quite know what it's doing all the time. My God, when you take a closer look at it, that is where people have a lot of impact in their professional lives. And I think that that's a good thing to be thinking about. How can I get into government? And I'm glad that people are thinking that again. I think that that is a very somewhat specialized field, which is to say that you can't build your professional network too early. And this is a very difficult balance, I think, for law students to strike, meaning we're telling them network, 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 and they come to law school hell-bent on networking from day one. So how do you get them to balance the fact that they should actually go to law school, and particularly their first year, right, and invest in the while also building their professional network. And if you leave the first year sacrosanct, as I think they more or less should, it's never too early to start building that professional network, particularly in places where law schools don't have a set track. So if you want to work in government, my short answer is get to know people who work in government, right? And build that network systematically from day one. Not from
Could I jump in on that real quick? Which is that I think every law school in the country has alumni who are very successful judges, successful in government. It's one of the core things that we do as lawyers. I'm married to a government lawyer. A couple things to think about. One would be to think about cost, because I think if you're committed to a government career, you're probably going to want to err on the side, if you can, of going to a lower cost law school, and or really gain a good knowledge of how public service loan forgiveness works, and making sure that's ended up to be a very complicated issue, and there have been some controversy about that recently. But government is an incredibly rewarding career. The financial payoff is a little bit more limited.
Could I also just jump in on that for a second? I think it's important to remember that there's all kinds of government work. So there's federal government work, state government work, and local and municipal. And there are excellent career paths in all of those. On the judge thing, I would say that is the one job you can't have right out of law school. So no one graduates from law school and becomes a judge. So you have to do something first. If you think you have an interest in judicial affairs and the work that judges do, I would highly recommend starting with a judicial clerkship. Right out of law school, a clerkship is an opportunity to work closely with a judge at the federal, state, or local level and learn more about what judges do. You don't need to stay there. You can go into private practice or into government or anywhere else from your clerkship, but it's an excellent opportunity right out of law school to spend a year or two in close contact in chambers with a particular judge.
Great, good, thanks. So I'm going to ask one final question from the audience. I'll then turn it back to Kellye. And Melanie, I'm going to pose it to you. I think it's really a good question, as well to Mary Lou in New York City. But you do have an increasing number of law students who are really going back to law school for a second career, right? They've been out, they've done something else. Maybe they haven't had the chance to go to law school in the past. They've always wanted to do it. So is there any advice that you specifically can give to, in a sense, second career, let's call them, less traditional or non-traditional law students, people coming back to school?
Yeah, I actually think they have a certain advantage. I think it's great if you've taken the time to do something else for a while, or you've had one career. I'm a second career law graduate, actually. And I think that some of the advantages of retooling is you have a lot of life experience. I mean, being a lawyer is being a counselor, a problem solver, a communicator, someone who's creative, someone who can connect with lots of different people and help them in their life. Even if you're a litigator, you're still helping, in a way, resolve problems that can't be ironed out any other way. And so if you're coming to school with some maturity, some wisdom developed through trial and error and the hard knocks of developing a career, that kind of nuance in your character, that kind of growth that you've experienced is really a wonderful thing to bring to your studies and to your second career. So I often tell graduates who are coming back after a first career not to, there's a lot of anxiety about am I too old or is this a good idea? I think you shouldn't discount the incredible talents and life experience and self-awareness that you're bringing that actually really are going to help you be successful. And the other thing I will say, and this was my experience a million years ago, was there's nothing like working to make you appreciate school. And so some of the best law students are people who know what it's like to get out there and hustle and have setbacks, and what a pleasure and a privilege it is to be able to study. And so often you're able to be more focused and on your studies and you're able to enjoy it more because you have that life experience that reminds you this isn't just another thing to get through. This is something to cherish and relish, and it allows you to thrive.
Yeah, fabulous. So second career as an advantage, not a disadvantage. Mary Lou, anything to add to what Melanie said?
No, the majority of our students have had more than 3 years of work before law school. And here's something Melanie didn't say. But so being a lawyer is about how learning to be better every day. That's what being a professional is, bringing your best to the table. That requires a certain amount of self-confidence and self-esteem, because it requires admitting that there's something you could do better. And I think that people who have worked in the world understand that better than people who have only been the recipients of grades and view a grade or a piece of feedback as a judgment on their character rather than as an opportunity to improve. And so I think that people who have been out in the world and have a sense of themselves as workers and grown-ups and not just as students actually often do better in the law school experience, in addition to when they set out to look for jobs.
Yeah, great insights. Thanks. Kellye, let me turn it back to you.
Great, Ken. Thank you so much. I want to note that there really are such a wide range of questions, and some of what I'm seeing there are questions about, are a wide range of people really welcome in law schools? And there I really want to just note, before I come back to a question for our panelists, that our schools really are serious about welcoming diverse students into their doors. I've had questions about GLBTQ AI students, and of course, welcome. I've seen questions here about what if you have a misdemeanor on your record, or even something more serious, and that's an area where our schools have really reached out to understand the problems of over-incarceration in our society, and working very closely with candidates that may have prior issues in the justice system to make sure they also have opportunity to go to law school. Certainly with gender and racial diversity, also want to particularly mention the issue of disability rights, that our law schools are very open and accommodating, and that's as it should be. So I do want to assure everyone who's watching that our schools are really serious about those open doors. And the admissions offices of each of the schools can provide you a range of information. We have very hardworking teams in admission through all the law schools, and they have a wealth of information to provide. So deans and Jim, the other thing I want to maybe ask is for a closing comment from each of you. And as I do that, I want to note that we also have a lot of questions about things like, are there particular areas of law that are hot? Are there cities that are undersaturated? Are certificate programs of any use? And does it really matter what I major in before I come to law school? So let me just, with those things that I see as commonalities in the questions, invite each of you to make a closing remark that would cover that, or other things that you haven't been able to get to today about careers in law that you'd like to share. And Jim, let me begin with you.
Sure. I mean, it's impossible to look into a crystal ball and say what's going to be hot when you graduate from law school. But certainly, recently, we have seen that healthcare law, for instance, is a growing area where there are a lot of jobs. And as Leslie explained, it's such a complicated area in terms of regulation. We expect that to continue. We've talked a little bit about the intersection of law and technology, and a couple people have talked about cybersecurity and data privacy. Those are growth areas for sure for the future. So I would predict that those will continue to be hot practice areas. We talked a little bit about IP, intellectual property, and that has been a tremendous growth area, and I think will continue to be there'll be a strong demand for people who have a Bachelor of Science degree of some sort, some kind of quantitative background, and then go to law school.
Great, thank you so much. Ben?
I would say, as far as areas that are hot, it's very hard to predict. I agree with everything Jim said. I think one trend, which a number of people talked about, is I think a lot of lawyers are going to be going into large business organizations. If I was advising somebody, 20, 25 years ago who was interested in business law, what you should do, you should try to seek a job at a large law firm right out of law school. I think a lot of really ambitious, talented people are starting to go directly into large organizations, and I think they can have really great, successful careers going that route. As far as what degree can prepare you for law school, I don't think there is a best, and all of us in our entering class have a remarkable range of undergraduate degrees. A lot of science and technology degrees work really well. The classic humanities work really well. Business works really well. Any of them work really well. I will say that law is a written profession in pretty much every context, and so no matter what you're studying as an undergraduate, the more writing experience you get, the better. And I just final plug from my end is I think that one of the themes that we've talked about today is how great a career law is, how powerful the JD is. I think it's a great decision for anybody who really wants to do it and is really passionate about it. I don't think it's a great way of avoiding the world for 3 years. It's a lot of work. But if you have the passion, it's a great career.
Thank you very much. Mary Lou, let me turn to you.
I guess what I want to say is that when I think about, well, I'll add elder law to the healthcare law, growing areas of, because the people who were born when I was born, there's a lot of us and we're getting old fast. But I guess what I want to say is, as we talk about technology changing the delivery of legal services, I think there are other ways legal services are going to change, and I don't know the answer to that. You, the people who are listening, do. I think things like community activism and organizing are going to be more a part of certain lawyers' toolkits. I think community-based education is going to be a standard part of every lawyer's toolkit, whether they're public interest lawyers or private sector lawyers. I think that an entrepreneurial spirit attached to a small firm practice or attached to the way a certain business entity thinks about operating is going to be really valued more and become a core part of more of the practice of law. So I think what the generation of many of you is bringing to this is really going to transform the practice of law over the next 20 years. And while you shouldn't lead with those inclinations at this point, at the beginning of your career, you should be keeping them germinating, because I'm excited about the way you're going to transform the profession.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Dan.
I would add only that no matter what you do, I talked to virtually no one who regretted having a clerkship after law school. 1 or 2 year period where you clerk for a judge after law school is almost uniformly beneficial. So some people going into law school don't quite know what clerkships are. I didn't, but I would definitely advise anyone thinking about going to law school to also think about pursuing a clerkship after law school. Very
good. I certainly hear the same thing. A lot learned in that short amount of time in doing a clerkship. Good. Melanie, let me ask you for your closing comment.
Well, these are tough acts to follow, and I think everyone has made amazing, important points. Okay, so since I have to close, I think I would say stop worrying so much. I think
now you tell me.
I think none of us can foresee the future. We don't know the ways in which the legal profession is going to evolve exactly. But what we do know is studying law is not just memorizing a bunch of rules. It's learning how to think in a creative way. And I can guarantee you that you're going to find things out about yourself that will shock and awe you. You will be so surprised at the way that you develop, the things that you do that you never thought you could do, and the person that you become. And no matter what field you go into, if it's private practice and you're working for corporations, if it's legal services, if it's something that's in business, you are going to make a difference to people. This is being a lawyer it's a life of service. And so you're going to come out and people are going to need you and they're going to depend on you. And what could be better than that? So don't forget to feel great and enjoy it while you're doing it. Don't always worry about the future. Immerse yourself in the present.
Thank you so much. What great wisdom we've had today. And I want to remind especially all of our candidates that are watching that please start your journey at lsac.org. We have right there everything you need to begin your enrollment journey to law school, and we're there to help you to make that journey a successful and pleasant one. So I want to encourage everyone to follow their passion for justice and for law. As you heard today from these wonderful deans and from Jim, who directs the National Association for Law Placement, there's just a wide variety of things that we need your voice in and that you can do with a law degree. So I want to thank all of our panelists for being here and turn it back to Ken as we close today to let you know what we're doing next month on Live with Kellye and Ken.
Yeah, thanks, Kellye. You know, every time we finish one of these programs, I just want to go right to the LSAC site and apply to law school all over again.
We'll accept you, Ken.
Kellye, I want to thank you. I want to thank the staffs of LSAC and of iLaw for the great work behind the scenes. I want to thank our 5 panelists. Thank you so much for your time. And of course, our audience. So the February program is already in the planning stage. It will be on February 25th on a most important topic: diversity, equity, and inclusion. So thanks again to everyone. We appreciate you being with us today, and have a great afternoon and evening. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.